Yes. Recording in progress. Okay. So sorry if you're just joining us, but we forgot to turn on the recording button before. But we'll continue from here where we just left off. Yeah. So even though a disciple may not initially have a clear picture, which you can say more or less is us when we of the goal or the complete sadhana to attain it, by acting in faith, yeah, then all will be revealed. And then he quotes Yasa Prasada Bhagavat Prasada. No, by the mercy of Krishna, one gets Guru. By the mercy of Guru, one gets Krishna. Then practitioner's state of mind. This is the summary. While the mercy of the Guru and the Vaishnavas may come unexpectedly, without cause or qualification, generally a devotee's state of mind is the governing factor in taking progressive steps in spiritual life. Yeah, it can happen without cause or qualification, but generally it does, but generally it's our state of mind where we invoke the mercy of the Lord. So, and then we mentioned, 1 second. Yeah, then I was writing in the book itself, I was underlining a few things. So just an interesting statement here. This I found this really interesting to read again. As explained in earlier chapters, the origin of the mind is false ego in goodness. Okay, a few devotees coming in, welcome, Hare Krishna. And when the mind is ruled by the mode of goodness, the resulting Sankapla or determination is conducted to spiritual life. However, if the mind is overcome by passion and ignorance, vows for spiritual advancement are impeded by thoughts of sensuality or brought to a standstill by lethargy. So that's the effect of the law of modes of nature. More. Any questions or anything needs to be clarified, please feel free to ask. Yeah, again, quoting from Brihat Bhagavatamrita, having experienced that determined chanting of his mantra transported him to heaven, Gopal Kumar was convinced that he would meet with the same success if he chanted to attain Mahaloka. He did. The successful result of earlier vows inspired Gopal Kumar to further determinations. Yeah, we get confidence, you follow Krishna consciousness and you have faith in the process. So it causes you to make further determinations. And as Gopal Kumar, he achieved the destination and that gave him faith and he continued on his path. And the last one, or the hidden, not last one, but difficulty of the ultimate goal. In contrast to a successful precedent as a cause for making vows, stands the imposing challenge of the goal itself. The rarity and difficulty of perfecting love of God is also a cause of vows. The very idea of a challenge, this is a principle here, that there's a challenge. And then if there's a challenge, hopefully there's an impetus to meet it. And Prabhupada said, impossible is anyone can finish that statement? Impossible is a
fool's dictionary.
Is a word in a fool's dictionary. And it seems like that's coming from Napoleon. Maharaj quotes Napoleon Bonaparte here, who said, the word impossible is not in my dictionary. So, then Prabhupada used that as well. Impossible is a word in the fool's dictionary. And quoting here from about Gopal Kumar, from Brihat Bhagavatamrita, my dear boy, how is it that you are so eager to take shelter of the lotus feet of this Gopal Dev and see all those sweet pastimes? Dear brother, you must understand that to attain him is exceedingly difficult, especially because of the devotional discipline required. Of this I am fully convinced. Yeah. So it mentions here, he took the final step from Dwarka to Vraj, and he took it as a challenge. Yeah? A challenge that he successfully met due to his strong desire to serve Krishna as a Gopal. So no doubt, it's a lofty goal that we're aspiring to achieve. But that's a challenge. That's a challenge. And actually, the very fact that we're practicing spiritual life means we have taken on that challenge. You can understand? So therefore, we have to keep that mood of determination. To completely take on that challenge and progress in our devotional practice. Then he mentions about humility, but that will be how it causes and nourishes determination. And Maharaj mentions that this will be spoken of elsewhere in detail. It's a very important factor in spiritual life, but doesn't elaborate on it here. And then this is the last slide here, then we begin reading. And he mentions the factors that nurture determination. And he mentions knowledge, faith, attachment, and taste arising from bhakti. And he gives a nice example here. Devotional service in practice is like building a house, one brick at a time. A mason has determination, not only to see the house completed, but he also has a recurrent determination with every brick he puts in place. You know, so getting closer to the complete house. Actually, there's one devotee, one is in Radhadesh, forget his name, I think he's a Prabhupada disciple, but he's built his own house from scratch, you know, brick by brick, you know, and we saw him working on the house, you know. So he's determined to build that house, you know, so brick by brick, you know, it gives his feeling confident. Yeah, it's nearly complete, nearly complete. It's getting there. You know? And there are conditions that make the mason's tiring efforts easier and more fruitful. Similarly, the determination of a sadhaka is enhanced by favorable considerations, just as they are hindered by those unfavorable. Okay. There's a bit more here, but okay, let's just cover this as well. And here, tastes from bhakti. As a devotee experiences enchanting taste and increasing wonder of devotional service, he becomes progressively knowledgeable, faithful, and attached. These spiritual assets give him strength to advance further. Moreover, by hearing of the excellence and sweetness of Pantavan, Raj Bhakti, a spontaneous desire will eventually arise within the devotee, and that determination will inspire him for his coveted destination. And then Maharaj gives an example, practical example, how knowledge matures determination. So I mentioned in the beginning, we just hear some aspirant may hear to chant Hare Krishna. Yeah. But then we may hear, oh, we have to chant 16 rounds. And then we hear his determination is now to chant 16 rounds. And then we hear we should chant without offense. So now the determination is to chant without offense. Yeah. So he mentions that that's how it works. In the same way, we reach the goal of prema. There's these different determinations like that. So perhaps let's just get into the reading. I hope that was a kind of summary of this chapter of where we read so far. If there's any questions on that or clarifications, if not, those who have the book, someone's out there not muted. Let me go on the mute campaign. Let me 1 second. Okay, mute. Just muted someone. Okay, so for those who have the book, it's page 390, and returning to our theme. Perhaps does anyone have the book out there? Perhaps no one might have the book. Sachari, no, I think you have the book. Anybody else out there?
I have the book, Prabhu.
Okay, you can go ahead and read.
Okay,
390.
shall I start? Yeah,
Returning
okay,
to
shall
our
I start
theme.
from the top? Shall I start from the top?
Okay, why not? Start from the top.
Okay. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
One must be so eager that without Krishna consciousness, one should become mad. One should become mad. That is Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's teaching. Separation, not direct contact. Direct contact is not possible. Neither that is the way of worshipping by the method of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. This is Sahajya Vada. I'm talking with Krishna. Krishna is snatching my cloth. There is a book. One lady has written her experience that Krishna comes, he talks with her and snatches her cloth. She has written openly, but this is not Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's way. Returning to our theme, inspiration for spiritual progress necessitates that the devotee is aware of what lies ahead in devotional service. And it is the responsibility of the spiritual master to ensure that the devotee's eyes are wide open, lest he succumb to the pitfalls of the age. While a young devotee may be excused for having a very general understanding of devotional principles, a decades-old practitioner is not. For a novice, the goal of practice may be general, go back to Godhead. But for a veteran, the goal should be to go back to Golok Vrindavan and serve Krishna in a specific mellow. Full realization of Rad's mellows may yet be forthcoming, but knowledge of it should be comprehensive. Both personal wisdom and the guidance of spiritual masters will prevent a devotee from running ahead of himself and entering into forbidden territory. But the risk of misusing transcendental knowledge is not a reason to remain in ignorance. In the oft-cited verse, the Lord describes the rule of thumb in transiting from one stage of bhakti to the next. It is firmly declared that the steady adherence of transcendentalists to their respective spiritual positions constitutes real piety, and that sin occurs when a transcendentalist neglects his prescribed duty. One who adopts this standard of piety and sin, sincerely desiring to give up all past association with sense gratification, is able to subdue materialistic activities which are by nature impure. By way of example, let us summarize the important role that transcendental knowledge plays in a devotee's march to perfection. Although Gopakumara was a pure-hearted practitioner, so much so that he was able to directly serve forms of the Lord even as a sadhaka, his progress to Raj Bhakti was firmly determined by his level of knowledge. As his knowledge matured, so did his practices. Thus, the general principle is that the determination to advance in Krishna consciousness corresponds to one's level of wisdom. Having said that, it's a fact that faith in one's mantra, in one's spiritual master, and in favorable devotional experiences also keep a devotee determined on the path of bhakti. But that determination does not elevate a sadhaka. Rather, it qualifies him to acquire the knowledge by which he can be elevated while affording him the strength to remain fixed in his practices. Like knowledge, both faith and attachment nurture progressive devotion, but the two need to be bolstered with the mastery of bhakti. Gopakumara had deep faith in and a natural attraction to Madana Gopala, although he did not quite know who Madana Gopala was. That faith and attraction protected him from distractions, and in tandem with his budding knowledge, helped raise him to the realm of liberation. However, his limited devotion could not give him admittance to Vaikuntha. Therefore, he had to augment the sadhana of chanting his mantra with learning the full truths about Krishna from Srimad Bhagavatam. We shall now look at how...
I just mentioned here, as far as I remember, I haven't read that section as yet, or we haven't read that together, part 2 of Bhagavatamrita. But I think he actually reaches Vaikuntha. And then, because his devotion is not mature, he's advised to go back to the earthly realm and read Srimad Bhagavatam. So that's the importance of Srimad Bhagavatam. In order for his devotion to be nurtured to a higher platform, he needed to study Bhagavatam. So that's what Marge is referring to here. You know? Okay.
Yeah.
Any questions or comments? It's quite technical, a lot of this, but if there are any questions or comments, we can try and answer. Something in the chat here. Okay. Sajari says the volume is not working. I presume it's okay now. You know, everyone can hear me? Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think she was apologizing because she sent it at the time that you were asking someone to read, and I think
Okay.
that
Okay.
she can hear, but she can't get on the microphone. Yeah.
Okay. If there's no questions or comments, we can read on. 391, the bottom.
Shall I carry on, Prabhu?
Yeah. Why not? I think there's not so many devotees have the book with us, so you can perhaps read a bit more.
Okay. We shall now look at how humility stimulates determined sadhana. While sadhana bhakti requires meaningful effort, no undertaking, including spiritual study, can be successful without Krishna's grace. Rama wonderfully describes it in this way. My Lord, if one is thrilled by even a slight trace of the mercy of your lotus feet, he can understand the greatness of your personality. But those who speculate to understand the supreme personality of Godhead are unable to know you, even though they continue to study the Vedas for many years. Thus, the inspiration and ability to climb the mountain of bhakti must be nurtured by Krishna's grace, and a key element by which their grace is attracted is the modest conduct of a devotee, his humility. Sanatana Goswami says that humility, more than any other trait, helps the devotee achieve success in loving devotion. Humility, danya,
Danya.
Danya. Is the root and most essential support of devotional service, without which a sadhaka, no matter how qualified, cannot attain his desired destination. Narad Muni defines humility in the following way. Wise men define humility, danya, as the state in which one always thinks oneself exceptionally incapable and low, even when endowed with all excellences. One should not mistakenly think that humility is a state of ignorance, poverty, or inability. To the contrary, of humble devotees endowed with all good qualities, he follows all the regulations of bhakti, and he has a healthy fear of material life. Moreover, humility is not an artificial show of meekness by one motivated for ends other than pure devotion. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has listed 4 primary symptoms of a sadhaka's humility. To think oneself lower than the grass, to be more tolerant than a tree, not to expect personal honor, and to offer all respect to others. While humility has its external symptoms, most significant is the state of heart. That state of heart finds its perfection at the stage of prema and is most fully felt by the gopis, who by its influence display an array of inconceivable transcendental symptoms of danya. A practitioner devotee creates a favorable environment for the internal appearance of danya by cultivating the limbs of bhakti. Such an environment manifests in regulated thoughts, words, and actions, which even in mature stages of devotion attract Krishna's attention. By divine grace, a devotee's determination bears fruit, and his success becomes the inspiration for facing further challenges in devotional service. One of the greatest examples of Krishna's mercy is the meeting with and guidance from the spiritual master. This is why Srila Prabhupada is addressed as his divine grace. An example of Krishna's direct grace to the world is his very special gift, Srila Prabhupada, by whose grace millions worldwide now tread the path of pure devotional service. Krishna's mercy is both direct and indirect. Direct mercy comes from him personally, indirect mercy through one of his innumerable agents. Indirect mercy is beautifully described by the analogy of the spiritual master cloud, who draws mercy from the Krishna ocean and then redistributes that mercy to those in need. Amazingly, there is no difference between grace that is direct or indirect. Indeed, it is said that in some ways, indirect mercy, the mercy of the spiritual master, is superior in attributes to direct mercy. As with all limbs of bhakti, the intensity with which a sadhaka cultivates humility must correspond to the stage of devotion after which he aspires. The further one desires to advance, the greater must be his humility. If humility does not mature, the devotee's inspiration to advance will be checked. The development of Danya finds its perfection in utter humility, an inseparable counterpart of prema. Thus, spontaneous absolute humility arises at transcendence, and it invokes prema through the grace of Krishna and his associates. In conclusion, we may examine an oft-raised argument that challenges the symptoms of humility. Some devotees are heard to say, since humility means that a devotee feels oneself to be worthless and unqualified, such negative sentiments make me disinclined to advance spiritually. This objection is built on the false premise that a good practitioner can become tired of or discouraged in his devotions. Yet the very nature of bhakti is that it is inexhaustible and that it thrives on itself. Krishna explains this to Narada long ago. My mercy, my devotional service, and ecstatic love for me all have this nature that no one ever feels that they have had enough. That should be simply obvious. Thus, as a devotee practices humility, his devotion naturally inspires him to serve Krishna in better and better ways. That is the way of real humility. Moreover, as Krishna is pleased with the devotee's quest after him, he further inspires his devotee, as stated in the verse beginning with Tesam
eva anukampa adam.
Okay. To show them special mercy, I dwelling in their hearts, destroy with the shining lamp of knowledge the darkness born of ignorance. We thus conclude and reply to the objection. For a devotee who is astute in devotional practices, intense humility will never cause him to be discouraged. To the contrary, humility will nurture his determination.
Hare Krishna. Okay, let's just stop there. Any questions or comments on this?
Plenty.
This is about humility.
Yes, plenty.
Something we need to cultivate.
Very complicated. And the last sentence, what Anupam Gopika read, that's very, very complicated. Humility, humble.
Well, as far as I can understand, let's just focus on some devotees are heard to say, or maybe the state of mind, since humility means that a devotee feels oneself to be worthless and unqualified. Such negative sentiments make me disinclined to advance spiritually. So that's the opposite of actual spiritual life. Yeah, actually, with great humility, one never endowed with great humility doesn't discourage one in spiritual life. It causes a great, in other words, one is very attentive to the practices in spiritual life. So Mad is addressing that here. It's a misunderstanding, because often that question always comes up when we speak about humility. Then safe I'm in the office and someone's lording it over me. Should I say something? Sometimes, how do you actually apply it practically? So, but here in spiritual life, it is essential, as Krishna doesn't like his devotees to become proud. Even though there's many stories of that. Indra is one where he became proud, so Krishna had to teach him a lesson. So, and actually, it's described in Brihad Bhagavatamrita that love nourishes humility, and humility nourishes prema. So they nourish each other. So I'm just speaking about the cultivation of humility. It's an interesting quality because as he gave Rupa Goswami, Narada Muni's definition, wise men define humility, danya, as a state in which one always thinks oneself exceptionally incapable and low, even though endowed with all excellencies. Yeah. So if one becomes disinclined to spiritual life, then that means they haven't understood. That is not actually real humility. Yeah.
But you just said He said, love nurtures humility and humility nurtures prema.
Yeah.
Yeah, can you explain this again, please?
Well, he said, that's why Maharaj was quoting the residents of Vrindavan and specifically the gopis, where they exhibit the highest level of humility, where, for instance, they think that the clouds are more advanced than them. They think the cows are more advanced than them. They think the deer is more advanced than them. They think the Yamuna is more advanced than them.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, that's a natural symptom of their. It is actually a symptom of prema. Is that it comes hand in hand with a deep humility. But also a sadhaka, as Maharaj mentions, that we have to cultivate humility in mind, in words and actions. So we don't wait for prema to come before we try and practice humility. And that's why he's quoting also from the Shastaka. Yeah, we have to practice. He gives these, Chana, the peace, and the Jana. To think oneself lower than the grass, to be more tolerant than a tree, not to expect personal honor and to offer all respect to others. So having quoted that about prema gives rise to humility, before we get to that stage, we have to cultivate humility, deep humility. And as Maharaj mentions that without that, one will be unable to make advancement in spiritual life. And it's a universal principle, actually, even in different religious traditions, isn't it? Then humility is seen as a specific quality that's needed. Yeah. What's that? Pride comes, as Jesus said, pride comes before the fall. Yeah. So it's a universal principle in one sense in practicing spiritual life. So Raj is focusing on that here. Any other questions on this?
You said that the gopis were thinking that clouds are better than me and the trees are better than me. If we start thinking all that now, before getting to Krishna, we'll be in depression. People can go in depression thinking, oh, this is negative, everything is negative, everyone else is better. There's no identity then.
Yeah, then that is not actual real cultivation of humility. That's kind of one's being influenced by our over familiarity with the material world again. Real, as Maharaj says, real humility causes one to be inspired in spiritual life, not the opposite. So it said, where would Maharaj say that? So
it's a transcendental humility we have to cultivate.
Yeah, you could say that, transcendental humility. As Maharaj says here, one should not mistakenly think that humility is a state of ignorance, poverty, or inability. To the contrary, a humble devotee is endowed with all good qualities. He follows all the regulations of bhakti, and he has a healthy sphere of material life. Moreover, humility is not an artificial show of meekness by one motivated for ends other than pure devotion. So someone who's celebrated as being an exemplar of humility is Haridas Thakur. But he wasn't thinking, I'm so low, I'm so fallen that I can't possibly chant my rounds today. Understand? No, he naturally thought himself as being, and he wouldn't even, as we know, he came from a Muslim background, and he actually saw himself because of that, and he admitted that I'm so fallen that I cannot enter the I cannot enter to the temple. And also he, out of his humility, when the Vaishnavas would take prasadam, he would never like to sit down with all the Vaishnavas, the Tanya Mahaprabhu. He would always sit at a distance because he felt himself so low and so fallen that he didn't have the qualification to actually take prasad with the Vaishnavas in some instances. But that didn't equate, or they didn't mean that he wasn't absorbed in his spiritual practices. It's quite deep, isn't it? He wasn't Yeah, because that's something else. If one is then giving up or one is feeling non-inspired, and then we have to go through there's some subtle adjustments there in the correct development of humility. That's the point that Marge is making here. And we're speaking about this with one devotee as well. We're also reading with some devotees from Scotland, these Sankapla Kaumudi, and one devotee, Ramananda Prabhu, was making this point about humility. Same thing, that humility in itself. It doesn't mean, he was quoting from one class, I think, where Kadamba Kana Maharaj was, how he's quite dramatic sometimes in his presentation. He was dramatically portraying a humble devotee. Ooh, ooh, exaggerating the mood of, I'm so fallen, Prabhu. I'm so fallen. I can't do this. I can't do that. But it's that actual humility is to get given an instruction and to follow it. Just like it was Srila Prabhupada's humility that he took the instruction of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. That's why Maharaj mentions his divine grace. So, and as we see we see in his poem upon arriving at Boston, a deep humility, deep profound humility. I'm insignificant beggar. But he didn't mean. So a wrong conception would be that Prabhupada arrives in Boston, sees himself as insignificant, and sees he's got no chance, and then goes back on the next boat. That wouldn't. But real humility is to follow the orders of the spiritual master, and from that humility, one becomes empowered. Krishna can trust the devotee with potencies to spread or practice Krishna consciousness. They can be entrusted with realizations because they have profound humility. Whereas someone who's very proud, then they cannot be entrusted to be empowered or to have any revelation from Krishna, because what will happen? They become, just become proud and become more proud, isn't it? Become more proud and more proud, and we have examples. Of course, we could speak about Hiranyakashipu and Ravana. They are they are very proud. So it's a very endearing quality, humility. And sometimes we can read about it, or we do read about it, and we're reading about it now. But when you actually see it, manifest in a devotee, you can really get an insight into what humility is. I remember many years ago when Jayapataka Maharaj was in good health, and then he came to give class, and after the class, devotees, were going, as we do, devotees go to the altar to take darshan, So he went to the altar to take darshan. Is it before or after? That part I can't remember. But he came to the front of the altar to actually take darshan and was praying like this. And one lady, she had she made a donation into the donation box. And Jayapataka Maharaj looked at her, and he realized that he doesn't have any money. And I could sense that he felt couldn't offer that. He felt that lady was in a better position than him. It's difficult, perhaps, but I got a sense of his deep humility. He really looked like he felt sorry that he couldn't give anything to the Lord, like this lady just did. But he has given his whole life to the Lord. But in that humility, he's thinking, she's in a better position than me, because he actually tapped his pockets to find something to give. But he didn't have anything to give at that point. I don't know if you understand that, but for me, I kind of saw that, and I got an inspiration. Wow, this is humility, And Prabhupada would often, isn't it? When Prabhupada would often be, he received lots of praise, but he'd always put it down to his spiritual master's grace. Could Prabhupada have done what he did, or done what he did if there was any pride? No. you know. That's why some devotees, after Prabhupada left, they tried to imitate Prabhupada, isn't it? Big Vyasa-san, you know, big Vyasa-san and loads of admirers and followers. But because they didn't have the requisite level of advancement, that following adoration went to their heads, and they became very proud. Some, not all, but some of them became very proud, and then that led to offenses, and then that led eventually to fall down. You understand the point you were making is that actual humility doesn't impede or doesn't cause us to lose, doesn't cause us to be unenthusiastic in spiritual life. It actually empowers us to actually perceive and receive the grace of the Lord. But still, one thinks one is described here incapable and low, even endowed with all excellences. So it's a bit of a mystery as well. How devotees have lots of excellences and they're very advanced, but they see themselves as being worthless. Like Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, he writes in Chaitanya Litamrita that I'm lower than worm in stall. No one should mention my name even. If they mention my name, they will be overcome with sin. This is Krishnadas Kaviraj, author of Chaitanya Litamrita, the Govinda Lilamrita. You know? Any other comments on that or questions? And we get plenty of practice as well to develop humility, especially when we're associating with devotees and we're rendering devotional service. There's so many opportunities to embrace the gift of humility. Yeah. Sometimes we may miss it. Now I'm trying to think of one story I read. This is one Christian saint I read. There's a brief autobiography about her life. And she wanted, from a very young age, she actually wanted to become a nun. From like 10, 11 years old. She just wanted to move. She wanted to be a nun. Of course, they wouldn't let her because she was too young. Then eventually at the age of 15, they allowed her and she came into the convent. And interesting story, because she only lived 5 years after that. She died of tuberculosis. But wow, very powerful what she writes about her development of God consciousness. But there's one point where she actually, I found it interesting because she's describing like what I understand to be in an ashram, but she's living in a nunnery. So there'd be some nuns who would be friendly to her, some wouldn't be, you know. And one time she, let me get this right. One time there was one elderly nun, and she actually needed help. And this specific lady I'm speaking about, Saint Teresa of St. Louis, her name, then she was overcome with ecstasy at the prospect of serving this elderly nun, of helping her. But that ecstasy, that thought, caused her to hesitate because she was so much overcome with this wonderful opportunity to render service to this elderly senior lady, nun, that someone else got to do the service before her. So one of the elders there began, at a later point, began to chastise this nun, this Saint Teresa of St. Louis, for not having the decency to actually serve this elderly nun. You follow the story? But she completely misunderstood her. She completely misunderstood it. And she took that as a jewel that was offered by the Lord to her. So she didn't explain herself. She said, yes, I'm very sorry. And she continued to get chastised. You know, I don't know how they chastise them, but sometimes I think some nuns can be quite heavy, I've heard. But you get the point here? You get the point that she was misunderstood, greatly misunderstood. But because of her humility, she saw that as a jewel that God was offering her was offering me a great jewel. This is a great thank you. And she writes after that, my dear Lord Jesus has been very kind to me. He's offered me a great jewel. I thank him so much for this. I was chastised and for a wrong reason, but thank you, dear Lord. Anyway, you get the point. So as an example of humility that just came to mind. Any thing to add on this, or any questions or comments, or something to share? Yeah, and we have to cultivate it. Something we have to cultivate, and we have to build upon it. Yeah. Anyone had any faults, any unhumility faults, where you reflect back on what you thought, and it's real, and it's a really prideful fault? Yeah, you think you're this or think that, or you have some. So we have to be, as I say, it's a constant cultivation and looking for opportunities to actually develop humility. Yeah. Especially, as I said, where we're in situations where we may be wrongly accused or etc. And they look at them as great opportunities, you know. Hare Krishna. So on that, let's humbly read on. If you got any questions or comments on that, I hope that's understood a bit more, Maharaj Kishore. Yeah. Yeah, and we can see that all of our prospective senior devotees and spiritual masters, that's underlining quality that they all have is humility. Yeah. So it's very important.
Yeah, I noticed that, you know, one time, like I was watching a class online with Tarun Krishna at the Manor, and somebody was asking a question, and they quoted something that he said, but it wasn't what he exactly said. And he just answered the question. He didn't bother to correct them. And then somebody else after the questions said, oh, Tarun was so humble. He didn't correct that person who misquoted him when he asked the question. Because he felt like he probably didn't want to embarrass him or correct, you know what I mean? So he just took that misquote, and the misquote, it wasn't in his favor, so to think. So somebody else corrected it at the end and said, no, that you misunderstood what Purun Krishna said. He said this and not that. I forget the exact terminology that was used. It was something about ahimsa farms. And but Tarun just answered the question very politely, and I could sense that he knew that the question wasn't phrased right. It wasn't, you know, what he had said. But still, But, you know, he was humble enough to just take it and explain, you know. And yeah, so I thought, I was impressed with that. I thought, wow, that's really nice that, you know, you are just gonna, you know, be humble like that.
Yeah, that's a very nice example. And again, that's an example when you actually see humility manifest, then you can understand it more. Like we're reading about it and it's quite deep, it's quite esoterical, but when you see it manifest in the Vaishnava, like you gave it a nice example of Tarun Krishna Prabhu, then you can get a sense of the depth of, you can get a sense of humility. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, very nice. Now, we've got 5 minutes left. Should we read some more? Yes, let's read some more.
Yeah.
So 395, perhaps I'll have a go at reading. It's okay. I shall humbly request if I can read. Hare Krishna. So 395, I think I'm in the right place. The Vedas declare that both the Supreme Lord and the living entities are in an eternal quest for the taste of transcendental pleasure. In this regard, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur cites the well-known verse, Rasuvaisha Rasam Bhivam Labdhanadi Bhavati. He himself is rasa, the taste or mellow of a particular relationship, and one who achieves this rasa certainly becomes anadi, filled with bliss. There cannot be any argument about the assertion that all living entities perform activities for the taste they derive from those acts, or more precisely, for the taste of the pleasure they derive from those acts. And the same can be said for any spiritual aspirant. Thus, the tastes a devotee derives from bhakti inspires his devotion, his advancement, and nourishes his determination. So rasa nurtures a sankalpa. It should be emphasized that the tastes and moods of devotion in practice must be in conformity with a devotee's aspired goal. Just as sadhana must correspond to sadhya, so the taste of practice should also conform to the taste one aspires for at perfection. One may ask, what happens when, in the matter of taste, there is incongruity to the principle of the practitioner and the means of practice should be in accord with their goal? It is true that even spiritual taste can become a distraction from or even unfavorable to the goal. Although this topic has been discussed in the earlier chapter, we quote Raghunath Das Goswami in our defense. Give up attraction for Lord Narayan, which leads to the world of Vaikuntha or mind. In Raj, worship Radha Krishna, two philanthropists who give away a jewel of pure love. Okay, a bit technical, but so in other words, there is a taste to be had in Vaikuntha Bhakti. Yeah, but that may not be, but that development of that taste may not be favorable to attain Raj Bhakti. Yeah, so Maharaj is mentioning that. Yeah. And he's quoting Raghunath Das Goswami, O mind, in Raj, worship Radha Krishna. Give up attraction to our Lord. So attraction means taste. So give up that attraction to our Lord Narayan. Our answer to the question then is, a devotee must abandon tastes that are not in conformity with his goal. Returning to the tastes that nourish love, we should remember that sadhana bhakti is about a systematic awakening of the most coveted taste, Krishna prema. As the devotee becomes purified, he increasingly tastes the development of that love by virtue of decreasingly conditioned states. This is the exacting transition from lust to love. In the following verse, Lord Krishna explains that the impetus to move up the staircase of sadhana is the increasingly spiritual tastes that the devotee relishes as he progresses. The well-known verse, this one, Vishayani nivatande nirahasya dehina vashovhajam vashovpyasya param drishtu nivatate. So the embodied soul may be restricted from sense enjoyment. The taste from sense objects remains, but by experiencing a higher taste, by ceasing such occasions, by experiencing a higher taste, he is fixed in consciousness, unquote. Again, it should be noted that just as sadhana has different tastes and moods, so too does prema. For that reason, the devotee must carefully chart the course for which he aspires. He should know the details of the goal for which the guidance of his spiritual master and through the scriptures approved by his guru. Now let us turn to the tastes in the stages of sadhana. Any questions about that? Again, quite technical. But this may be perhaps more relevant to the higher stages where one is relatively pure-hearted. So therefore, in that state of purity, they very much feel attracted to different incarnations to Krishna in general. Yeah, so they may be very much attracted to hearing about Lord Nrsimhadev, very much attracted to hearing the pastime with Lord Ram, but the actual further development of that rasa may not be favorable for the ultimate goal of Raj Bhakti. So you understand? So it has to be one takes guidance from the spiritual master in that regard to develop the rasa that's specifically in regards to one's goal. Yeah. And perhaps we're paused there for today. There's quite quite deep, these subjects we've just spoken about. So perhaps we need to digest it, think about it and meditate upon it. But any final questions or comments? Otherwise we can pause there. And tomorrow we should be, tomorrow, Krishna willing, we can continue with Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2. That's the plan, yeah? Okay, thank you everyone. I hope this was of interest, what we read today and the discussion. Thank you for joining us again, and thank you for not giving up hope and joining us again, even though we haven't been here for 2 weeks. Very much appreciate that. And let's get together tomorrow for Bhagavad Gita. Jai Shri Prabhupada ki Jai.
Thank you, Prabhu. It was very
Thank
nurturing.
you. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare.